Thank you. Sorry.
So I have had clients, potential clients call me, and they're thinking about, and I'm sure this relates to several of you. You know, you're looking to buy that first property, and what you're thinking is you're going to be buying, you know, a small property, multiple small properties. The reality is that your budget is important. And so as a lawyer, as a good lawyer who wants to be the right lawyer for you, I have to be sensitive to your costs. Okay. I have to be sensitive to your budget. Because if I care, right? So
people might knock at our doors to ask participation from the D9. Sometimes it's not feasible for us always to do it. It puts a strain on us as a, you know, like you said, it's not like it's our organization, like it's just one. You got 8 trying to coordinate.
Marty. Sorry about that. I for a minute I thought that was a question, so I'm sorry. I muted the person. Thank you. Sorry about that.
No problem. So so here's something that to keep in mind. Like I said, I work with forms generated by lawyers. I work with printed forms, and if you have if they're printed forms that are circulated regularly in Indiana, you could get a lawyer to kind of mark up the form for you. Okay. Tell them what you're looking to do. They can mark it up for you. And then maybe with that markup in mind, you can do that for the next multiple deals that you're doing. In other words, you don't have to call the lawyer every single time you're generating a contract for a deal. That is perfectly acceptable because you've actually, you know, as long as you've involved the lawyer with that first contract, and then for the next contract, maybe you're making the exact same changes. Maybe then you pick up the phone and call the lawyer if a question comes up or if you get pushback, but you're not having to really invest heavily in using a lawyer in that process. So that is something that can be done, but it starts with you recognizing, I don't know what this contract does for me or against me. So having a lawyer who at least provide some guidance, and maybe, you know, shoot, you can even have a lawyer educate you on the document, tells you why to mark it up and how to mark it up, and then maybe use that with the next time. But the key point is to recognize you don't know what you don't know, and so you need a lawyer to help you understand the contract, even if it's a printed form. I'm just trying to say that there are ways to do it that can manage your legal budget if you're doing small deals and you see a sequence of small deals coming. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. The next phase in the deal is due diligence. Now, with clients like Monty, the one piece of due diligence that all lawyers do is title and survey review. Okay. Now, with clients like Monty, I don't really do anything else on due diligence because he has a team, he knows what he's doing, he covers all the other things. Every once in a while, so for example, I'm right now representing a church and they're buying a property. And, you know, churches don't buy properties every day. Most churches don't buy properties every day anyway. And so, you know, with them, I'm basically saying, okay, I'm going to do title and survey, but make sure you've hired an engineer, make sure you've done environmental. So I'll go through the list of things to do and kind of guide them and maybe answer questions about them. So if I was dealing with like maybe somebody new to real estate, I'd probably say, okay, here are the kind of things you need to look for, and this is why. Hire the right professional to do this for you. Title and survey, I'm going to look at. And the reason that you need a lawyer to look at title and survey is that title work tells you what you're actually getting. And title work has lots of documents with really tiny bitty print. Somebody needs to read that, and that's what your lawyer does. Newsflash, title companies do not represent you. Title companies are invaluable. They're like brokers. You can't do a deal without them. You need one. You need to buy title insurance. But a title insurance company is an insurance company. And what are insurance companies trying to do? Well, what are they there for? They're there to pay on claims. And of course, in their small print, they do everything they can to not pay on claims, right? So So they're going to list anything and everything they can against the property on that title commitment, because everything they list means they won't have to pay a claim on any of those things. They're not trying, they're not reviewing title for you. They're reviewing title to protect themselves. So the lawyer comes in, and sometimes I go, I don't even think that affects the property, or you need to describe that differently. Or sometimes I'm looking at this document and I go, Monty, there's a blanket easement across this property. Title company isn't necessarily going to tell you there's a blanket easement. They might, but they might not. Because again, they're just trying to protect themselves. So your lawyer reviews your title and then lets you know what, that building you plan to build on that land, it'll work and it'll be fine. There's no restrictions affecting title at this point. Or, there's this easement that goes, a pipeline, there's some kind of sewer line or something that's right through the middle of the property. Your engineers are probably going to tell you this, but we'll need to get that taken care of. And they say, oh yeah, I know, I'm ready, I'm good, I'm going to get that taken care of. But we're basically there to help them just make sure that the property is what you think the property is supposed to be.
Hey, Sharon, let me ask you this. Why do we even need title insurance? If you looked at the title and the title is all clear and stuff and it's good, why do we need title insurance?
It's the same reason you need any insurance, because it's the same reason why actually you hire a lawyer. It's expensive, you hate paying for it, and you probably don't need it anyway, but when you need it, you're glad you have it.
So if the
title company made a mistake, when they say, oh, it's clear,
that's mine.
Oh, and here's another key piece in a way to look at this. Title companies, when they know they're going to sell you title insurance, that's where they make their money, right? You can ask them to do a title search, okay? And you can pay them just to do a title.
I'm talking about title searches.
But you know for sure they're going to do a better job when they're going to issue title insurance to cover, if that makes sense, right? I can pay $150 to a title company, or maybe pay $1,000, and they can do a title. They can review titles. They can pull all the documents, all that kind of stuff. But when they actually are about to issue a policy on it, they do a much better job. It's a whole different process, because that's their butt on the line. So, and they do make mistakes.
If they make a mistake and a long lost heir comes up and claims part of this title, long lost heir comes that didn't show up, they'd take care of that.
They would take care of that.
They would take care. So we don't have to worry about that. So if
some crazy thing with an easement that somehow didn't get revealed, they'd have to take care of that. They'd have to cover that. I mean, it doesn't happen too often these days because title companies just do a really good job, but it does still happen. And you don't want your property to be the one that tests the issue, right?
Yeah.
Does that make sense? I felt like that was a little bit off. Does that make sense? Questions? Any other questions about that? Okay. So you need a lawyer for your head.
Sorry, there's a little bit of a debate going on in the chat window about verbal agreements versus written agreements, which I think I'll just point out. This is why we need an attorney, a local Indiana attorney, to help answer these kind of questions, because there is some confusion about.
So I don't know what Indiana law is.
Right.
I'm not sure what the debate is, but let me just make this point. And by the way, verbal agreements probably in many places are actually legal agreements, but this is why we don't even deal with verbal agreements. Because what happens in a verbal agreement? Well, I thought you said this. No, I said that. That's why you don't ever do verbal agreements. I mean, it's the he said, she said thing. It's classic. So a verbal agreement, it may be enforceable in Indiana. I don't know. I don't care. Don't do it. It's just foolish. You're asking for trouble if you do it. And that's true. That's true in any state in this country. Okay.
And Sharon, I was thinking about something the other day that, I'm a realtor and a developer both. And sometimes in those special provisions, you know, those contracts, those printed forms in the back, and those special provisions where we can write our own stuff as realtors. So Marty, you asked a minute ago about something I'd done. I've written many things in those things that really caused me trouble because they were unclear the way I wrote them. And again, that's kind of practice in law. When you're starting to write, you know, things like the seller will stay in the building for 3 days after closing, but if he's got to leave it clean, or, you know, I mean, you start putting these things, or they're going to leave something in the building, or they're going to do something that can cause you real trouble. And that is, in most places, that's like practice in law. So if you've done that, you may want to reconsider doing that, because you could really cause yourself real damage, you know, saying something, right, Sharon? I mean, we're writing language.
And it's less about you practicing law without a license as much as it is about what I mentioned earlier, which is that lawyers, we read, we draft, we write differently than you do. And so, you know, Monty will usually what a client will do, like I'll get a term sheet and they'll say something like what Monty just said. So then I sit and I think about, how do I say this so that it's very clear and it contemplates what somebody might do, somebody else might do, and address all the possible issues that I can think of. Then I let Monty look at it, and Monty says, oh, but what about if they do this? Oh, yeah, let me tweak it and make it clear that if that happens, this is what happens. So it's just that point, which is I mean, you can tell. I mean, can't you have any lawyer friends? Can you tell that the way they write is just different than the way you write? You know, I mean, yeah, that's kind of what in part, I guess, is what we're trained to do. But over the course of just my experience practicing law, I've learned to draft like that. So we just approach things a little bit differently. But again, in my mind is, I want to make sure that there's no confusion over what the parties intend to do. There's no confusion over what's going to happen. And so that's why, again, verbal agreements, it doesn't matter whether it's legal or not, just don't do it. It's just not, you're just asking for trouble. Okay. Or don't voluntarily do it. Let me put it that way. Don't do it voluntarily. So the next piece of, and the next phase in the transaction is making decisions about entity formation. Okay. Now, this is the part that may be, I may get a little confusing here, so please interrupt with questions if you get a little confused.
So entity means whether I'm going to buy it in my own name, or I'm going to create an LLC, or I'm going to create a corporation, or I have partners, or all those things, right? The entity
That's exactly what I'm talking about. So what most real estate developers do is we form an entity for every property you're going to own. And remind me, I want to talk about in the incremental piece, how you might approach that. That's typically what we do. That's typically what lenders want to do. And part of the reason you do that is if your entity, let me back up a second. So as Monty said, let's say I'm going to buy a duplex. I can buy it in my personal name, Sharon Simmons. My name's on the deed. If I have a tenant and the tenant falls and they hire this ambulance chaser and they sue me, they're suing me personally. So all my personal assets are at risk if I were to lose. Now, you know, hopefully I've maintained the building and done what I'm supposed to do, but you know how some of these ambulance chasers are. So I want to protect my personal assets. So rather than own the property in my personal name, I create an entity. And let's say
Sharon, wouldn't my insurance company though cover it?
We're going to get to that. When I talk about the incremental component, we'll talk about insurance. Okay. So I could form an entity to own this duplex. Okay. And that entity would be separate and apart. So this is me. Here's the entity. So the entity is separate and apart. Think of it as a person. You know, Mitt Romney, when he ran for president, got in trouble because he said a corporation's a person. Well, legally, he's right. You know, he got all kinds of flack, but legally, that is the way in the law we look at it. That entity is a separate person, separate from me, Sharon Simmons, individual. okay? Now, here's the problem. No, I should not, no, I'm getting ahead of myself. So the reason you do that is so if that ambulance chaser now sues the entity as the owner of the property, okay, maybe they win and the entity crumbles, the entity loses the property, but my personal assets over here are fine because I didn't own the property, my entity owned the property. So you have to, but if you don't set the entity up the right way, then suddenly the entity and me personally are too immersed. And then if that happens, then when it's called piercing the corporate veil. So if I don't have an entity that's set up separate and apart from me personally, then that ambulance chaser can sue both of us, the entity and me, and possibly win against both of us. So the only way to keep piercing the corporate veil means that that ambulance chaser is able to convince the court that really the entity is not separate from me personally. We're really one and the same. That's why they call it piercing the corporate veil. Okay. Question.
Sharon, I see a question from Cheryl Ash about this topic. So Cheryl, I just unmuted you. Feel free to ask your question.
Okay.
And then Brian has one too.
I understand you. So say I own 5 properties. Are you saying each property would be a separate entity or a separate LLC? Is that what you're saying?
Hold on to that thought, Cheryl. That's
Okay.
a perfect question. Hold on. And if I don't quite get to it, remind me.
Okay.
Brian, somebody had a question in the chat that was a good one. What was it? Different entities provide different levels of legal protection. No. When someone comes to me, so you have C corporation, you have an S corporation, you have limited partnerships, you have LLCs. I can protect you and limit your legal liability with any of those entities. I usually will say to someone, if someone comes to me and says, what type of entity should I use? I say, ask your accountant, because I don't understand the tax implications of those different entities. Okay, that's not what I do. But if your accountant says, oh, form a C Corp, if they actually said that, I'd probably say you might want to check with another accountant because nobody says that. But if they did, I'd say, okay, I can set you up with a C Corp and I can protect you from legal liability with that entity, because all of those will give you limited liability if you set them up properly and maintain them properly. Okay, so this is where, Cheryl, I'm not forgetting about you. So this is why you need a lawyer. So I know what some of you are thinking, and they probably have done, I can just use LegalZoom. Problem is that LegalZoom probably only gets you so far, because you have to, in order to avoid this piercing of the corporate veil, you have to do everything right, and then you have to continue to do everything right. And what I have found is that it takes a lawyer to bug people. Like I've got a couple of people who I'm always like, that's not the name of your entity. You need to use the exact name of your entity. You know, you've got to get a tax ID number. You have to do all these things to make sure that entity looks like a separate person, separate and apart from you. Now, and a lawyer is who can help you do that. Now, lawyers can use complicated forms of agreement. They can use simple forms of agreement. That's usually driven by whether you have partners or not. So if Monty's the only person in a particular entity, I can use a simple form of a document. The moment he brings a partner in, or the moment he says I might bring a partner in, I use a whole different agreement, because partners introduce complication. You know, when we were talking about verbal agreements and what have you, when it comes to a partnership, you have to make sure you've addressed the issues that might come up, will come up, maybe will come up, and that's what we do in the partnership agreement. Okay, and so you need a lawyer to help guide you and direct you. So I've done tons of partnership agreements. I've dealt with partners in dispute. So there's some things that I will automatically say, okay, we need to decide how we're going to handle these particular situations, because these are true about every partnership. Okay, and by the way, I'm saying partnership. It doesn't matter whether it's an LLC where you have members, or a limited partnership with partners, or a corporation with shareholders. The relationship between the parties is what I'm talking about when I say partners and partnerships, okay? So that partnership agreement needs to document how you guys are going to interact. And you need a lawyer to help you do that. Again, for the same reasons I mentioned before, lawyers read things differently and we write things differently. Now,
Sharon, there's a question here. There's a question here from Allison that said, what liabilities does LLC ownership open up for neighbors or residents if the property isn't kept up? I mean, if a property isn't kept up, that's probably more of a code. That's a code violation. It would be a city. That wouldn't be a. I guess you could sue somebody. I don't know if you could.
Well, you know, I don't know that unless you have some kind of restrictive covenant that requires you to make, where you have
like
an
you're
agreement,
in an HOA, like you're in an HOA,
like a
or
homeowners association, or just any kind of restrictive covenant where your neighbors don't generally get to sue you for not keeping up the property. Now, that's what Monty's saying. You call the city and you say there's a code violation over here, but there's no obligation between property owners unless there's a document that creates that relationship. Okay.
Hey, Sharon, and what's going on the LLC, or that when you have partners in there, what are the kind of things that generally that would happen? I mean, like getting a divorce. I mean, like splitting up the partnership. Handling disputes and stuff. Does the agreement help us deal with those disputes and things like that? Or let's say somebody's taking money they're not supposed to, or things, whatever. What should we, somebody's not reporting, like say I say I'm going to report the financials every month and I don't do it. Is that the kind of things the partnership is going to say?
The partnership agreement should set out, especially when you have multiple partners or more than one, right? It should set out the obligations of each partner. If you've got a passive investor, when does the passive investor get to have a vote? Sometimes passive investors don't get a vote at all. Sometimes they do. What happens if the partner dies? What happens if a partner wants to transfer their interest? What happens if a partner gets divorced? All those are all the type of issues that if I'm talking to a client, that I help them address in terms of their partnership, in terms of the agreement between the parties. And the good news is that once you come up with a good format for your partnership agreement, you can use that for multiple deals. You can use that for every deal going forward. So with Monty, I have a form that I start with him and I tweak it based upon the particulars of that particular deal. So it's not like every single.
Does the form also I know, and I'm asking this question, but because I know the answer, but so I'm not and you guys out there that are actually promoting these deals and putting them together, you may be getting money for the development fee or the leasing of the property or the property management fees. And Sharon puts all those in the partnership agreement. So there is no misunderstanding that I'm getting paid by the partnership to do this work. She always is after me. I say, I'll do it later. Marty, that's one of those things that'll get you in trouble too. I said, do it later. We'll do it later. Sharon said, no, we need to put it in here. We need to put it in the agreement.
One out of that should be done.
That's a disclosure issue. So the other thing that often I'm doing in documents is just disclosing, because things that don't get disclosed often look shady, or wait, you're getting a fee for that? Well, we said we were going to do that in the first place. So it helps that Monty tells people, he tells his partners, his investors, the banks, those kinds of things. But then again, remember what I said about verbal, people forget. So then it's also in writing. And so that just confirms what usually has been said. So let's talk about Cheryl's question, because and it's also what Monty alluded to too. So here's the issue. And I'm not going to give you a definitive statement. I'm going to talk to you about the way I would talk to you if you were a client of mine. And one of the key things with dealing with lawyers is you are the boss. You're the boss of me. So I can give you suggestions. I can walk you through things, but it's your decision how you're going to handle things. Part of what I'm trying to do is help you manage your risk. But risk is very personal. And so you ultimately are the one who decides, are you willing to take this risk or not? Okay. So here's what I would be saying to you, Cheryl. First thing I'd want to know is, okay, what exactly are you buying? So if you're an incremental developer, let's say maybe, and I don't know, maybe you're buying just one
resident, one single family.
If you're buying one single family,
let's say I'm buying 5 single family.
Huh? Well, no,
Let's say I'm buying 5.
you're about to buy your first single family and you're going to renovate it, rent it out. I would not say to you, let's form an entity. I wouldn't say that. I would say to you, I would tell you about forming an entity. But there's costs involved in forming an entity. And if you're not going to have any partners, then I might say to you, here's your risk. Somebody slips and falls, they're going to sue you. But maybe you can insure adequately to minimize that risk. And that may be an effective way to do it. Okay. So now if what you say, this is my first house, but I plan to buy 5 more by year end houses, then what I might say is, what we could do is form an LLC and just buy all 5 of those houses and put it in the same LLC. Okay. Now, let's say though, what you're looking to do is buy your first project is, or your second or third is a strip center. With that'll maybe have 4, 5, 6 tenants. Might want to do an LLC in that case, because again, it's a kind of a bigger property. There's a little bit more risk involved. An LLC might make more sense in that context. Okay. Let's say you've got 2 houses and you're now about to buy a strip center. I might say, the houses in your name might be okay. Again, make sure you have enough insurance. Strip center, put that in a LLC. Makes sense? So it kind of depends upon what your projects are. What is the financial investment you're making? How complicated of a deal is it? That's the kind of thing that will drive whether you need to have an entity for each property, whether you put it in an entity or your individual name. I've got one client who lots of people come to me and say, this is what I'm planning to do. I'm going to buy a bunch of houses and whatever. And it's actually kind of hard to do. I have one client though who's managed to acquire 100 single family houses that he rents out, what have you. It's a lot. He was probably on house number 70 when he thought, I might need to form some entities.
My goodness. Oh, no.
And so then it was like, well, okay, now we don't need an entity per house. We probably need more than one entity because you got so many houses. So maybe we think in terms of houses in this by geographic area going one. Maybe we think in terms of value, maybe going one. And by the way, when you're thinking about transferring after the fact, then you have to deal with your bank too, because banks don't want you transferring without their approval. So it is something to think about, but it's something to talk through with your lawyer. And it's an issue of weight. You've got to weigh practical aspects versus your risk tolerance. And again, that's where I just kind of give you counsel and information, but ultimately it's your decision. Cheryl, you still have a question?
Yes. Okay, I just got to thinking, how responsible are you for who your tenants are? I mean, let's say you do all the background checks and all. Okay, I need to explain. I'm interested in doing a boarding house for sex offenders. Because I do volunteer work with sex offenders, and finding housing is a really difficult thing.
Right.
My question is, if you, for instance, end up in a place that allows you in a boarding house, how much liability do you have who your tenants are? I guess that could be true of any kind of tenant. Mm-hmm. You could rent a house to someone that's, I don't know, cooks meth and they blow up their house and your house next door.
Yeah. The question with the sex offenders, I don't know the answer to that. I don't know. But that is why you need a lawyer who can think that through with you and draft whatever documentation needs to be drafted to give you some protection from that.
Yeah, that definitely needs to, Cheryl, that would definitely, in my opinion, as a developer, to be a single entity LLC for that unit itself.
Yeah.
I wouldn't want anything else connected to it.
And so it'd be that's the perfect way to look at it, which is the single entity, because you don't want, it could be problematic.
Right.
And so if it failed, you wouldn't want it to affect any of your other deals. And the other thing is that's an insurance question. Making sure you have adequate
that I understand about insurance. Yeah. Okay, just in general. Okay, so what if your tenants do? You can tell some of the people I've worked with. I know someone that cooked meth, blew up their house and caused some damage to the house next to them.
So
Now, if that's a rental property, how much are you responsible for what your tenants do in your property?
Well, here's what a lawyer would say. Here's what the ambulance chaser would say, which is, you should have known what was going on. They might even be able to prove you did know what was going on. Therefore, you have responsibility and you're at fault. So certainly you're going to want a lease. And this is, again, lawyer comes in to help you. You need a lease that prohibits those types, and most leases would prohibit that type of activity. And this is just part of, this is probably one of those topics for one of your future seminars. You know, property management, probably 101 is kind of making sure that people are taking care of your property and not doing what they're not supposed to do with your property. So, because like I said, if you're an ambulance chaser, I'm going to try to bring you down over that. And I might be able to prove there was some negligence involved.
Thanks.
Okay.
Allison had a follow-up question in the chat window a little earlier about the difficulties that cities have enforcing against LLCs. And Allison, I don't know if you want to unmute yourself and explain that in a little more detail. I think you're probably referring to the fact that it's really hard to track down the responsible party, and a lot of bad landlords hide behind LLCs, and they're very difficult to find and to enforce against.
So, you know, in
Yes.
Texas, okay, go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Allison.
Yes, that's kind of what I'm asking about, is where that relationship is between, and the line between kind of helping the good landlords avoid an ambulance chaser, as you mentioned, versus helping, you know, the neighborhoods avoid the LLCs that take advantage of the neighborhoods that aren't being responsible, and how the city.
So in Texas, Secretary of State's so if Monty called me with this issue, let's say Monty is having problems with a neighbor, and, you know, first of all, you know, you want to find out who actually owns the property. And a lot of real estate records are online now. So, you know, and of course, you can always get in touch with a broker and find out who owns it. And if it is like an entity, I can go to the Secretary of State records in Texas online and identify who the key players are in that LLC. And in fact, that's where you can find who you serve if you're suing somebody. And so you shouldn't be able to hide behind your LLC. The LLC can be sued. And
it can get fined. And the city can find the LLC and they can attach the property with liens. So just like they could a person. So there's no reason the LLC shouldn't keep any cities from that doesn't protect people from getting like high weeds or, you know, not keeping up your house.
So
it can't protect you there. It's going to go on your
if an LLC has not kept up its like registered mail address, is that considered something that allows for piercing the corporate veil?
I don't know. I wouldn't think that alone would do it. And I'm just trying to think about what the Texas statute says about failure to maintain the accurate registered agent address. Well, at the end of the day, there should be a registered agent that you're going to sue, and so that you're going to serve. And so at some point in that process, that person would say, I'm not the right person, or, you know, at some point you know, I don't do litigation, by the way, so that's why I'm kind of struggling with how would they do that. But there has to be a way to, and by the way, it's like in Texas, like I can see who the manager, I can see who the managers are. I can see and you get addresses. There's the registered agent address. There's the address for the entity. There's information on who the board members are, say. So you might have to just kind of harass a whole bunch of people. But a lot of information typically is with the Secretary of State.
We don't have much time to go into depth with this, so we might need to move on. But that's a good thing to continue. Again, you can ask your lawyer, but the cities can file a lien and they can attach that property. So you can't, when you go to sell that property, those liens would be attached.
Another way you can check is through the GIS system. So like if you, and it's online, I get it through MakeHigh, and you go and you put in the property, and then I forget the next word to use, but I click this thing, which then shows me who basically is paying taxes on that property. And it'll have the name and the address. And then, well, I'm a retired librarian. Then what we do is we take that name and we do basically a Google search using the address. And often we're able to find sometimes a newer address.
Okay, so I think Allison, I think this, what I would just say in summary is that I would not let the fact that it's an entity keep you guys from just pushing. There's got to be a way to get through it. There's got to be. So, okay, so we talked about entity formation. Let me think. I think that's all I wanted to mention on that. The next phase is dealing with your lender in a transaction. And again, you have a bunch of documents, and what I keep saying, lawyers read and write differently. So a lawyer will help you with the loan documents. By the way, sometimes lenders say we're not going to make any changes unless it's HUD. That's typically not true. But what you want is a good lawyer who knows the right kinds of things and right kinds of changes to ask for. A lawyer who's not experienced will ask for all kinds of stuff that's unnecessary. A lawyer who's experienced will, if they ask for changes, they're asking for changes that actually will affect you and that actually will bring value if you get the change made. Sometimes it's not worth making changes. And sometimes in that context, all I'm doing is making sure my client understands what the documents are that they're signing. If they're signing a guarantee, I'm making sure they understand the implications of it. So again, for efficiency's sake, lawyers are used to reading these loan documents. It will save you time and headache to have them read and fill you in. And if things need to be changed, let them negotiate it for you. Then we get to the closing.
So if the lender, if I'm getting a loan in my LLC, the lender always is asking me to personally guarantee it. So in addition, the LLC, they make me sign, the LLC has to sign on the note. But then additionally, they make me personally guarantee it, meaning all my personal assets are going in the note too. Is that common? Is that common?
Yes. Well, it's common depending upon the kind of loan you're getting. So construction loans.
For our small developer loans, it's going to be nearly always across the board. Nearly always,
yes. Because banks know what they're doing, and they know that an LLC has limited liability. So they want somebody on the hook who's real and live. And so, yeah, they're going to want an individual name for sure. Now, sometimes what you can do, depending upon, the size of the deal, the bank you're dealing with, sometimes you can limit your liability to some degree. It just depends. So then the next,
go ahead.
Yeah. Next phase is we move to closing. And again, at closing, what do you have? A bunch of documents. And so again, you need the lawyer who is reading and tells you, make sure that what you're signing is what you should be signing. One little news flash here, title companies put documents in front of you at closing. Guess what? Those documents are to protect the title company. They are not to protect you. And in fact, and you can look at them and think, oh, what's the big deal? I don't need a lawyer to read that. Well, what title companies commonly do is that I just see this all the time, is that the title company will have you make representations to them. That's if you're selling the property, that's appropriate. But then they'll also pull in the buyer and the buyer's lender. So they'll have you making all these representations, not just to them, but to the buyer and the buyer's lender. Well, you've got a contract that sets out your deal with the buyer. You don't want to add more representations than what you already agreed to. And why should you be saying something for the benefit of the buyer's lender? That's not your business. So you need a lawyer who will review the title company documents to make sure that the title company is asking you is asking for reasonable protections for themselves, but not changing the terms of your deal with the other parties. Okay.
Yeah, Just this week, Sharon, just this week, this just happened. Sharon and I are closing the deal. The title company who we've been working with for also 25 years, the title company lady we've been working with is putting documents in front of me to sign on something. And I constantly am saying, has Sharon seen this? Has Sharon seen this? Oh no, Sharon hadn't seen this. So I said, well, I'm not going to sign it until Sharon sees it. And so I've gotten so detailed with this. I just constantly saying, don't fund this. I'm going to sign everything. And I want you to send it. When I sign everything, I want you to send it back, tell the title company, send it back to Sharon one more time for one more check. So, cause they put stuff in there all the time. And most of it's not necessary because a lot of it, she'll just say, we're not signing that. And they'll say, okay. You know, and it is representations. And when she says representations, it means that I'm saying something that I may not even know is true, but what I said may also get me denied from title insurance. It may get me denied from something. It may actually hurt me in something. And it's not a problem until it's a problem. You know, those are not
right. Whenever you make a representation, you are creating liability for yourself.
That's right. Yeah.
Because you're saying this is the way it is. And if it's not, then you potentially expose yourself to a lawsuit or liability.
Yeah.
Okay. So we're running out of time here. And what I really want to get into is how to find and hire a good attorney, because I think this is really important. And we've alluded to a little of this, but the one piece of advice that I just have to give and can't emphasize enough, and I want to make sure I say this before we completely run out of time, you should identify and interview multiple lawyers. That is the key point. If you don't remember anything else about anything that was said, remember that. I do this myself. When I've had to hire a lawyer to help a client on something that's in an area that's not my specialty, I do that. And that's why I can say to you, it is invaluable. You will learn a lot just from talking to multiple people. You will get a better feel for what you want and what you might like in a lawyer just by talking to multiple people. And here's the other thing, that do not underestimate this. The attorney-client relationship is a relationship. Like Monty said earlier, we're like family because we've been working together for so long. But it is a relationship. If you interview somebody and you don't feel good about them, don't hire them. I don't care what kind of resume they have. If they give you a bad feeling, do not hire them. There are way too many commercial real estate lawyers in the world today. I think you could probably find another one. It may take more work to find them, but do the work. You don't want someone who annoys you in the first conversation. Don't hire them. That tells you something. So interview multiple people. Now, even if you talk to the first lawyer, let's say your best real estate friend tells you, here's my lawyer, Sharon Simmons. I love her. She's great. You talk to me. You love me. You still need to talk to 2 or 3 more people, because just do it because you will learn more and you don't know. So 1 or 2 things will happen. Either you will talk to them and these other 2 and you'll go, Sharon really was the best, or you'll talk to them and go, well, Sharon was fine, but I really like this person better. So you don't lose anything. And I think you gain tremendously by talking to multiple people. Okay. Another thing, I shouldn't say it like this. I was going to be real dogmatic. So I'm going to say it dogmatically, but don't think about it that way. Don't hire anybody that wants to charge you for that first conversation. Don't hire them. A lawyer should talk to you for free on the phone when you are interviewing them, because that's what you're doing. You're interviewing them. Have you ever shown up for an interview and paid the employer? No. So don't pay them just to have a conversation, just to see if you like them. Now, the lawyer is also interviewing you, because they're, when somebody calls me, I get to decide whether I want to work for them or not. But that conversation should be for free. And you don't need to go and sit in somebody's office. When you go sit in somebody's office, that always takes more time. Pick up the phone. They should be willing to talk to you for 20, 30 minutes on the phone. for free. And that's enough time to kind of get a feel. And I say 30 minutes. I mean, I've talked to people for longer than that. It just depends. But talk to them and interview them and talk to multiple people. Now, oh, and by the way, how to get names. The best way is referrals. And I don't know if you're a small developer group, if you guys have any kind of list of lawyers for a resource list or anything like that, but that might be something that you guys might think about doing, because it is hard enough to find. And even if they do list people, again, talk to multiple lawyers. Don't just hire the first one. But referrals is
something else too. If you get with a lawyer early on, like I did with Sharon, you know, we don't have to spend as much time talking about deals anymore over the years, so it gets cheaper. You know, we can do them quicker. But if you have to start over again and you're not using, and we're talking about small developers here, but you should be using the lawyer all the time. It's like using your architect. It's the same way, or using your contractor. You know, it's the same. And you know, over time, it gets easier. The first one's it's going to be a little bit tougher, and you get used to dealing with each other. But it's just like dealing with a vendor. But a lawyer's more personal, because you're really telling them all your personal stuff. You know, they really know all your personal stuff. So if I died today, Sharon would be highly involved in everything that I have and do. She would be vital to it. It couldn't happen without her. So it helps. Those are the kind of things that if you don't have a lawyer, it's like not having a doctor. If you don't have a general practice doctor, it's hard to go get a specialist. You know, it's hard to go get somebody. So it's the same way here. You got to have somebody you have a relationship with. Mm-hmm.
So in that interview, and that's why if your gut tells you, I'm not so sure about them, go with your gut, don't hire them. And it can also it might take a couple of lawyers before you find the right one. That could happen. But if you kind of do this process of interviewing multiple people, that reduces the likelihood that you'll have that happen. Now, what happens in that interview? What do you need to talk about? What do you need to learn? Make sure you tell them about your transaction. You don't have to tell them what the property is. You don't have to tell them who the parties are. You know, wait till you're kind of hiring before you tell them that detail. But they need to know, well, I'm going to buy a piece of raw land and I'm hoping to build on it. Or I'm going to buy this old building downtown and renovate it, turn it into mixed use. Or I'm just going to buy single family homes. I want a portfolio of about a dozen single family homes. Tell them what you're looking to do, because they need to know, and you need to know whether they can actually help you do what it is you want to do. And you have to figure out, can they actually help me do this? And let me go back to something Monty said earlier on. What you're looking for is an attorney who spends probably 90-95% of their time just doing commercial real estate. So they're not doing litigation. Commercial real estate is transactional. I've been to the court 2 times in my 30-some year career. Both times it was small claims court. I think one time Monty
went with me. You went with me, yeah, one time. Yeah.
And small claims court, right? Small claims, you don't even need a lawyer to go to small claims. So no. One time I let Monty talk me into it. Another time I think I did it for a friend. And, you know, I'm not ever doing that again. But the point is that if your lawyer, if you interview them and it turns out they're spending time in the courtroom, the odds are they're not quite what you want, because what you want is someone who's done tons of deals. And so that means you have to focus, you have to specialize. Now, what you have to be wary of is sometimes someone will say, well, can you help me with this? And they'll say yes, because they want the business. So you might have to be a little sneaky. And you say, oh, that's great. Say, hey, by the way, I also need a litigator. Do you do litigation? And they say yes. And you go, okay, that's not who I want. Or, do you know, I might need a family law attorney. Do you do that? Yes. Don't hire them. Because you really want people who spend all day, every day doing deals. Sometimes you can tell this from their website, from their bio. Like, I don't even actually have a website. So you'd have to ask me for my bio. Or I just need to be able to tell you, I've done X number of deals and this is what I do. But you need to figure out how you can determine how that they spend a ton of time doing commercial real estate. I've got 2 minutes that I want to share, talk about the money piece, because 2 minutes is probably not nearly enough time. But if I were you as an incremental developer, I would go ahead probably and bite the bullet and pay for that lawyer who's $400 an hour, maybe more. And that's kind of scary, I know. But what you really are looking for is that person who knows what you don't know. And so, and I think you can also even have sort of an honest conversation with them about your concerns about fees. If you're talking to somebody who's at a big firm, in which case probably $400 an hour is probably not what they're charging. It's probably more than that. They might have an associate who could manage you. An associate's not a bad way to go, because the associate has a partner above them who can also fill in the gaps of what the associate doesn't know. But as I was preparing for this and thinking about, who the audience is, there is something to be said for paying the extra for the years of experience, because it really will, at least initially, get you down the road. And maybe you do that for a couple of deals, and then you try to find someone who's not quite as expensive because maybe you've learned a little bit more. It's a balancing act. It's a balancing game. And again, like I said earlier, you're the one who's taking the risk. So I can't tell you what to do. I'm just trying to give you some ways to think about it. But what you need is someone with several years of experience. Oh, here's another tip. Like somebody like me, like I'm a solo practitioner now, but I started work at a big law firm, and that's where I got trained, in the real estate section of the big law firm. So if you can identify somebody like me, somebody who was trained in a big firm, but now they're on their own, or now they're in a boutique firm, that's what you've hit the bonanza then, because now you've got someone who has spent all their time doing real estate. They've been trained around people who do big deals and lots of deals, but they're not going to be as expensive. Yeah. So,
but somebody that charges $400 an hour may be cheaper than somebody that charges $200 an hour. If they're quick at getting the deals done, and they know what you want, you're clear with them. And like Sharon said, you can fill out the contract forms, the printed forms, and then give them to your attorney. You can do work and not have don't use your attorney as a secretary. So,
it's not quite
too expensive.
It's too expensive. Yeah.
All right. So I'm going to interrupt here because it is now 7:59, and we did sort of commit to trying to stick to our schedule here. There's a lot to talk about. And Sharon, this was, to be honest, like even more fascinating than I expected it to be in a lot of ways. I think
and it's really, Marty, it's really not something, and this is just really the beginning. I mean, Sharon, you're covering a lot of material here. It's just so much. It probably, this is not something you do lightly. You have to go and talk to people yourself and learn from yourself. And maybe we should probably do this again too, down the road again.
Yep. I did bring up on my screen the series. So the next session, we're going to talk about real estate more specifically, like how do we find and buy properties from a real estate perspective? Not, hopefully your lawyer will review those deals, but how do you do those? How do you find the properties, and how do you purchase them? In January, we're going to talk to two really great architects who understand small development and know a lot of tips and tricks to make your properties more valuable without spending more money than you need to. And then in February, we're going to talk to a local investor and real estate developer, a big time real estate developer who's done projects up around Notre Dame, who's going to talk to us from his perspective about how we look at deals carefully and make sure they're good investments for us, and whether or not they're going to make money for us or not. And then finally, if we get a little more specific back to law, in March, we are going to talk to a local real estate attorney who has done a lot of local real estate transactions. And we can ask him more specific questions about law in Indiana and real estate actions in Indiana specifically, because Sharon's, she's not here to give us legal advice today in the traditional sense. We're talking generally about these topics. So,
and Marty, Marty, I would suggest that when you have the local guy, that you get him to talk a little bit about hiring lawyers in Indiana, because maybe there's
Sure.
some, you know, I think that would be helpful.
Yep, absolutely. So again, this series is designed to touch on all the topics that a small developer needs to get good at, or at least conversant in order to make these sessions successful. So even going to April, where we're talking about zoning, and we are going to plan another networking event in the spring. We had a really nice event in September. I think many of you were there outside at Howard Park. And because part of what makes this work is that we talk to one another and we support one another, and that you know that you're not alone in doing this work, and you've got friends and colleagues that you can tap. You want to ask about a lawyer, you want to ask about a contractor, you want to vet a plumber. You know, having a network of people that you can talk to is really helpful in making good decisions. So I don't know if any people have any final questions. Yes, Mr. Williams.
Is it possible to get Sharon and Marty's number just to ask some post questions?
Up to Sharon and Monty if they want to share some contact information in the chat window. Monty, thank you for being here. I know Monty's actually got to jump off and go to another talk right now.
Well, I can get it from, if he gives permission, I can get it from you later. That's not a problem.
I don't get it from Mike. I don't mind.
You know, I'm crazy enough that I'm going to give you my phone number right now to everybody.
Well, you're both brave and generous people, and and they're doing this tonight for free for all of us as well. You know, we're not paying Sharon or Monty to be here. They're doing this because they love helping small developers, and Monty in particular has grown to love South Bend. So we want to see all of you grow and thrive and get good.
This is Cheryl.
I have to go, Marty. I'll see you.
Yep. All right.
This is Cheryl Ash. It says it's recorded. How do we get a hold of the recording?
So Cheryl, what I'll do is review the recording and clean it up a little bit, and eventually we will put it probably on YouTube. We'll have to figure it out. We have a website. I'll put it in the chat window called it's southbendin.gov/BSB, which stands for Build South Bend. And that website has some information about purchasing property, doing due diligence, city properties. We have some profiles of developers, including Miss Barbara Turner, who's on this call. Hi, Barbara. And some other small developers here in South Bend who have done great work over the last couple of years. So probably the link to the video will be there. I will, once I determine how that's going to go, Cheryl, I'll let the whole group know.
Thank you. Great session.
Thanks for hanging in there, everyone. And I hope to see you at our next session in December when we talk about real estate transactions. Let me know if you have any feedback. If this was too slow, too fast, you know, I think all of you have my email address, so feel free to reach out and let me know, because we want to make this as productive and as efficient for you as possible. Sharon, thank you for being here tonight.
It was my pleasure.
Yeah, you did a great job. Yeah. Good night, everyone. I am going to